Good morning. My guest today is Abdelrahman ElGendy, who's a former political prisoner in Egypt who spent more than 6 years behind bars from October 2013 until his quite recent release in January 2020. He was arrested at the age of 17 and left prison 24 years old. While in prison, he earned an engineering degree from Ain Shams University. I really don't know how you did that. Welcome, Abdelrahman.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much.
I was very, very much looking forward to talking to you. So my first question is, okay, 2 years after the revolution, you sort of became an accidental activist, right?
Yeah.
You were not really an activist. You weren't really involved in the revolution. You were about 14, 15 years old at the time.
Exactly.
You were still in high school. And I don't think politics was even on your mind at the time.
Mhm.
And then you, like I said, you became an accidental activist. What happened?
Okay, so thank you so much first. So this is actually like the first time for me to tell the story. I was basically 14, yes, turning 15, like you said, when the revolution happened. I hadn't been actively involved in it. Our household was not really into politics, and I was very oblivious to so much, like many people my age at the time. So I only started doing stuff like, cleaning the streets, painting the pavements, those sorts of things that we started doing after the revolution. And it was all very thrilling and exciting. But then I started the ثانوية the Egyptian high school certificate, and basically the two most important years of an Egyptian's life, because they determine everything in the future. So I was completely immersed in my studies. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to that. So I did not spare like a single thought for politics during those 2 years. The turning point for me again was when 14th of August 2013 happened, and the massacre that happened in Rabaa, because it was at the start very personal, because a really, really close friend of mine whom I loved and admired a lot, her father was killed there. And she was completely destroyed and broken and devastated, as I painfully remember. I was so angry then, and it was right after I was done with ثانوية عامة and waiting to start my first year in the German university in Cairo. I had gotten accepted there with a nice scholarship into engineering school. So in that summer vacation, I tried to do some stuff for her, joining some marches in New Cairo where I live. I even once did something completely on my own. I painted some signs about her father, held them in the street in Rahab City. So it was a very personal turning point that was not politically motivated at first, but then it made me start actually reading and researching everything that happened during all that period of time. And on the day I was arrested, there was this huge event on the 6th of October, 2013 in Ramses. I wanted to take part. My parents refused so strongly. They were completely against it. And we had this huge fight of the day. I got too emotional. I told them that I want to do something for those who died, and particularly for that girl and her father and her family, and who would speak up if we don't, and all those sentimentalities. And eventually my father agreed to go on the condition that he goes with me in the car, but promising that I don't step outside the car and we stay only for a little while so I can just, clear my conscience, like he said. And once we got there, he parked a little far from everyone was standing and made me promise not to leave the car. So I just took out my phone. I started shooting pictures and videos from the window, and I was unaware of a plainclothes policeman standing close by. So a couple of minutes later, the door was snapped open. They dragged me outside the car. They snatched the phone. They started beating the hell out of me and saying, I'm working with the terrorists, shooting pictures for Al Jazeera. You're trying to destroy Egypt's public image and blah, blah, blah.
Did they pull your father out as well?
Oh, at that point, they didn't pull him.
Okay.
They just pulled me because I was taking pictures.
Mm-hmm.
So they pulled me out, and that was one of the most traumatizing moments of my life. Like, I couldn't even relive the memory until later on when I recalled it back. Because it was, 1 second you were there was nothing. And then the second after that, everything was completely flipped, everything just turned around. And yeah, he just pulled me, and took me away. And my father went down. He chased after me, screaming, that's my son, let him go. We didn't do nothing and stuff like that. They tried pushing him away first, and he didn't budge, so they arrested him too. And then it started. So yeah, practically my activism lifespan was less than 2 months, from after the 14th of August until the 2nd of October 2013. Yeah, it was very personally motivated for most of the part of it. That's basically like until the day I got arrested.
And what happened to your father then? Was he imprisoned? What happened?
So basically, it's a long story. I'm going to try to tell you like a recap or an overview of the entire like journey. Okay. So after we got arrested, we were kept in the telecom central in room C's. We were locked in a small room where officers came and went, and they kept telling us at first not to worry, just a few hours. They'll let us go after everything is calmed down, the regular
But
stuff.
you were together?
Yes, we were together at first.
That's good.
We were arrested very early before the actual like event even started. So we stayed around 6 to 7 hours locked up in that room. And around 9 p.m., they told us that we'll be transferred to the police station just to be released from there. And they said like, we captured you, so we can't just let you go. You have to be legally released from the police station procedures. So we got there to the police station as Bakia, and the officer in charge received us and sent us to the holding cells underground. And around 2 a.m., our names were called. So we thought we were being released, only to be ordered to stand on like a long line of people. They handcuffed us, took us out to the lorry with 66 other people. And later on, they became our case, the 6th of October 2013 case. So those the 68 people. That was the case.
Wow.
They moved us to a Salam security camp. It was pretty famous at that particular time. They used to move people there first before sending them out to prisons. So we were interrogated by state security officers. I'm jumping all over the trauma here, like all this part, that was like horrifying. So yeah, they crammed us into like a small cell after the interrogation to spend 10 days. And I just would never, ever forget them in my life. I've written a lot about them. That room's capacity was maximum 15 people. We were 63 people crammed in that space. There were 5 girls and they were like in a separate cell. The 63 males, we were all crammed in that space. We were literally sleeping on top of each other, like not a metaphor. Literally, there was like a first level of bodies and then another level, and then some more scattered on top of those. And my father has like many chronic diseases and he did not have his medicine. We were both crammed in a corner of the room with people on top of us. I was desperately trying to fan him with a piece of cardboard that I found on the ground. So it was tragic. It was completely traumatic and tragic. And we spent 10 days like this. Up until this moment, I have absolutely no idea how we all survived them. We always remember them in a haze. We just don't know
sure.
how 10 days passed in that situation. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And it was actually one of like people always ask me like, what was the scariest moment that happened to you during like more than 6 years? So what was the scariest moment? And I have a lot of horrible memories, but I would always say that the most scary moment for me was when I always, my father was the kind of person who always knows what to do. He always knows like what the solution is. He can get us. He knows a lot of people. He knows who to call, what to do, how to manage anything. And I was like terribly scared the moment I looked at him and realized he had no idea. He had no clue what to do. Only then I realized like, yeah, we're deep. That's like, it's serious. So yeah, we were moved one night before Eid al-Adha. It was then before Eid. They told us we were being released again for the Eid, only to find ourselves moved to Al-Marg prison. Just later on, we found out it's a common technique, a trick they used to make prisoners comply at the first period of their imprisonment by always telling them they're being released, they're going home and so on, just to make moving them around easier. So I'm gonna now like do some serious skipping, not to bore people with too much details. We spent a year in pre-trial detention, 6 months of which we were getting, repeated automatic renewals every time we stood before a prosecutor. Realized how serious it was because they were treating us like a one package thing. They did not care who did what, who was where, or whatever. We were just being dealt with as if we were one person, a single entity, all of us being renewed automatically, tried automatically, like the same case, not people, individuals asking, treat us as So yeah, we finally stood before a judge after 6 months. And it was one of those special judges they appointed for the whole, terrorism case trials they came up with. And 6 months later, we were moved to Tora prison, suddenly just to wait for the final sentence. We received a sentence of 15 years of maximum security imprisonment then. So yeah, this is something I want to point out here because it's going to be relevant in the future. So I was underage when I was arrested. I was 17, turning 18 in a couple of months. So there were 5 more underage guys in our case when they arrested us. So when they arrested me, they took my ID and broke it before delivering us to the police station. So it was not stated in my file that I was underage. It was like a mistake. So the young guys went to juvie and I entered prison. I wasn't supposed to. We did not really speak up then because I was terrified of being separated from my father and vice versa. So we just stayed silent. We didn't mention it. But at the trial, a lawyer, he said time and time again, I was underage. It's a mistake. It should be fixed. It's not stated in the file. And it was like to no avail. At the sentencing day, the underage guys were sentenced only to 10 years, and I was sentenced to 15 along with the adults. So yeah, we entered the darkest phase of our imprisonment by being moved to Wadi Natron prison as convicted inmates. It was like a whole new level of physical and verbal abuse and psychological torture. Back then, the political prisoners were not that many, so we were like completely abused. Later on, when the numbers increased, we started, making strikes and stuff and standing up and trying to get some rights. But at that particular moment, 2014, 2015, it was the worst of times, really. So what was like a million times worse, agonizing for me, that I had to witness all this abuse, not only happening to me, but also happening to my father. And I can't begin to describe how that felt.
No, I can't imagine it either.
Like the guilt I was suffocating with, because I was the reason he was this nightmare. He didn't have anything, absolutely anything to do with it. And he was only there to make sure I was never put in this horror, only to end up living it with me, making it a million times more horrific. So that was like the most psychologically torturing aspect of the whole thing. We spent a year and a half waiting for the appeal here to the sentence. So you can apply for appeal after your sentence, and we did that. And after a year and a half, it was shockingly rejected. And it was one of the hardest moments, like it destroyed most of us, because a final rejected appeal, it means like it was done. There are no more legal actions. You're spending your sentence, that's it, done, 15 years. What was devastating is that the underage guys, they had their sentences reduced to 2 years. And then they all went home in 2016, while I remained with the adults, despite everything the lawyer provided, again, in the appeal to prove that I was underage at the time of the arrest. And my appeal got rejected, and I just, got the same 15 years like the adults. So yeah, I didn't go home then with them. Later on, there were like some developments. They started the whole presidential pardon thingy for political prisoners in 2016, I think, late 2016 in November, for prisoners with final sentences. Most of my case was moved to total maximum security prison too, except for the students. We, at the time of the exams, they moved the students from prisons all over the country to a single prison where the universities come and examine them and stuff like that. So at that particular time, the students of the case were at that prison. So we weren't moved with the case. So the entire case was moved to total maximum security prison, except for us. My father was moved with them. They spent nearly another year of constant state security interrogation. It was a psychological nightmare, but then they had the hope of being released on that pardon thingy. My father started asking everyone there about how he can move me to. He talked to every officer, mentioned me in every interrogation, until they actually finally moved me there 1 year later. I was united with him again after 1 year of separation in total maximum security prison. And miraculously, only 2 months later, he was actually released on a presidential pardon with 21 other members of our case.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah, so yeah, that was 3.5 years for him in prison. He spent 3.5 years.
Yeah,
that was ironically good.
It's relatively good. Yeah, better than the alternative.
Exactly.
And
so yeah, that day was crazy. Yeah. I was in a whirlpool of emotion. Like there's this famous opening of The Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
Yes.
That was the case then. I was out of my mind with belief that my father was finally being released. And I was out of my mind with grief, and because it was completely lonely. Like that was the first time I was truly and utterly on my own in prison.
Right.
It was horrific that he was there, but he had my back somehow. Like he's a family member. He's my father at the end. So, you in prison, you always want someone, to have your back. So yeah, I spent 3 more years in that place. I witnessed 3 more pardons go. The total was 5 pardons. I watched most of my case members and many friends and close ones be released. They left me behind over and over. And that was also one of the really torturous moments, because I cannot begin to explain the kind of emotional and psychological damage that place and those circumstances did to me. And having to say goodbye and watch people leave you to their homes over and over and over through all those years, it does an irreparable damage to your emotions and how you start detaching yourself from people, which is something I wrote a lot about too. And I still suffer from the consequences of my relationships with people now. You just can't, it's really hard to just attach yourself to anyone, because you're always worrying that they might be, released at any moment. So you just form these barriers, and it's really hard to undo that. So yeah, later I learned that I was not going to be included in a pardoning. They just nicely informed me that my name is not really in the pool they picked from, Some people theorized that it was because of some social media campaigns about me. The state security hate to look as if they were, succumb to pressure or something from the social media. So people who are being talked about on social media, they just end up not releasing them at all, not to look as if they come to it. That was a theory. Others claimed it was just pure luck or lack of luck. So bottom line, I was not leaving. I was finishing my 15-year sentence, and that was the conclusion I started to perceive prison with. And nothing changed until 6 years and 3 months have passed since that very day. If you remember, I mentioned the whole underage situation. I was not even supposed to be in prison. And ever since my father was released, he did everything to try and get this heard, to find some sort of legal hold to get me out. And everyone said it was impossible. Lawyers, everyone we knew. And no one cares if your final appeal got refused and no one decided to act on it, then it was over. No one was willing, to handle my case as an individual. We were being treated as numbers from the very first start, so it was to no avail. And then there was, on one particular day, the prosecutor general was changed. It was replaced with a new one. And the new one tried to do something about the whole human rights situation. I think there was this international campaign about Egypt and human rights and stuff like that. It was in 2019. And they tried to fix the poor image. And then he created this WhatsApp number for human rights violations complaints. I just saw it by complete chance. I was reading one of the national papers that they allowed in prison. So I told my family about it in the visit. I gave them the number and said, give it a shot. You got nothing to lose. We already had zero hopes. We were submitting those complaints, left and right all those years, and no one gave them a second glance. So I thought, what's one more? Mm-hmm. And miraculously moved. And my father went to check at it. And by chance, the prosecutor in charge was in the office the day that he went there. He tried to convince the soldiers to ask him if he would meet with my father. And even more surprisingly, he actually did agree. And my father met him. He sat with him. He told him the whole story, who we were. And then the man actually, he sympathized a bit. He sent for the case file. He checked it out, and he saw that I was indeed underage at the time of my arrest. He promised my father he would proceed with legal steps in the matter. And 1 week later, out of nowhere, I was just normally sleeping off, one of those miserable prison days. I found him calling me to tell me that my sentence was terminated, would be retried. It's over.
Wow.
I would just jump ahead because I would talk for hours about this crazy moment. It was just out of the blue. You can't imagine. Just like the moment of arrest, the moment of release was completely out of the blue. I could not foresee it like a second in the future. So I was moved to the court. A judge finally listened to my story, finally as an individual, and then he decided to issue a release order for me to be retried from the outside. Later on, they sentenced me to 5 years, and I had already spent 6 years and 3 months. So yeah, it was finally over. I was released. That's basically it.
Wow, that is a heartbreaking story. All these years lost for no reason. One of the things that you said was, you said it in writing actually, because now you write also for Mada Masr. They publish a lot of what you wrote, and they used to publish it even when you were in prison, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so you did mention that many of your thoughts and beliefs and convictions are the result of the prison period and all its diverse experiences. Can you explain that more? What happened in prison that got you more got you more political?
I would say I always tell people get surprised when they hear this, but I always tell people that I hate politics, like the intricacies of it. I hate talking about, ministers and decisions and stuff like that. And I'm more into the theoretical or the conceptual aspect of the whole thing, the philosophical parts of the resistance, injustice, that kind of thing. So what
human rights approach.
What?
Which is a very human rights approach.
Exactly. And I think when you get too involved in politics, you have to somehow give up on some principles that I'm not ready to give up on. Mm-hmm. So I just choose. I know some people have to do that. They say some people have to do the dirty work. It has to happen. Some people have to get involved in politics and work. And I understand it's practical, but I don't think I was made for it. I don't know. Some people can do it. Some people can't. And I don't think I was made for it, but I was extremely fascinated by the whole philosophical aspects. I was 17. Like I told you, most of my interests were around basketball and studying, and I was this kind of person. I was a really hard worker, but only in those spheres, academic and athletic spheres. I would say I was ignorant. I wouldn't really read a lot of, books about philosophy, thought, whatever. So what happened in prison, I started reading so much, and I started being exposed to so many diverse ideologies and beliefs, and I had no idea those people even existed in the first place. So I had this close circle of friends outside around me, from the club, from school, stuff like that. And I was never exposed to this kind of beliefs. Some of them were shocking. I sat with people from all like the Islamist guys up until ISIS. We had people from ISIS with us. I sat with people from 6th of April movements, some leftists, some communists, ultras, like the White Knights and Ahli. So we had like such a diverse collection of people inside. And that in and of itself was something very, a lot of revelations happen when you just realize how many people are out there. It's not just you. You're in that close bubble of people you're familiar with. And then you just realize there are actually a lot of people out there. And their existence in and of itself makes you question so many things. Like if they're all out there and they all think they're so right, and every one of them think they're absolute right, and everyone else is wrong, there must be like a lot of conflicts out there. There must be something going on here. You need some research to study. Like not all of them can be right. And it makes you think that most of them might be right to some extent, wrong to some extent. It just makes you reconsider everything you believe in and start to want to, delve deeper into that. So that's what happened with me. And at the start, I had I had a lot of horrible experiences with the Islamists, because it was a really hard time for them to accept anyone different. And they usually assume that since you stood or supported something that happened for them, then you're automatically the same ideology, have the same beliefs, support them. And when you don't, when you start like criticizing them, acting in a different way, they just completely flip sides and treat you as an enemy. And it was really hard for me in there. I had many, many hard moments. Like I could talk for hours about it. To cut long story short, it was really horrible. I had so many bad experiences in there because of them. Even my father didn't absolutely care about anything. And even at one time they tried to get to me by, annoying him somehow and hurting him somehow so they could annoy me. It was really horrible. I'd rather not talk about it, but it was horrible. I had a really horrible experience with them in there. And actually, I met some individuals who were surprisingly really good. That actually made me question something too. I had a very horrible collective experience with them, and then I met really bright individuals, and that made me think that it's really hard to judge people based on what ideology they fit into. And that actually was a really nice revelation, because when I sat with individuals and had some individuals conversations and discussions with them, I realized they're like, yeah, everyone is human at the end, and you can reach some middle ground and speak with them, even if when they act collectively, you might not like them as a direction or as an ideology or their beliefs, how they act. But you could find some middle ground. And Dr. Hadaf Swaif used to call it Mesoterra. She had a book named that. And it's about that common ground that we can all find in the middle of all this darkness and injustice. So that was something really important that I learned about people. I just learned so much about people, dealing with people. And under those circumstances, they always say that prison brings out the worst in everyone, all of us, including me. You can imagine we were being all squeezed into really small cells, and we had to survive. And eventually people start talking about, food and places of sleep. We used to sleep in 30 centimeters wide. So you had to sleep like with your, you call it, I don't know what's it called. I can't explain the term, tasif. It has to do with a sword. Like you're on an edge of a sword, on your side like this. You can't even bend your knee.
On the side, yeah.
Exactly. And completely straight, it's really hard. And each one of us is allocated those 30 centimeters. So 32 centimeters is a great addition. So if someone takes like an additional centimeter from you, it makes a difference. You know what I mean? It does make a difference. So it's really horrible that we're talking about these really small stuff. It makes us, we switch to survival mode. So it brings out the worst of us. And that made me experience a whole different side of people, like realize what length people could go to under such extreme conditions. So I think this is one really, really important thing that I learned in prison, the people. I learned how to deal with different people, diverse backgrounds, all ideologies, all social classes, everything you can imagine. I've met all age groups, everything you can imagine, like I've met in there. People from 18 years old until 60 something years old, all kinds of ideologies and beliefs, from all governors in Egypt. So I met everything, and I was someone who was bubbled up in his own, little circle. So that was a huge transition for me in
And at
prison.
such a young age and an impressionable age too. So, I mean, going through this experience is not an easy thing. I can't imagine at 17. So you said that in your readings, you read Nigm, you read Al-Abnoudi, you read, so you were permitted to have books, unlike some people now who are not allowed to have books, right?
We were not legally permitted to have books. It was all, everything we had in prison had to do with smuggling. Like in prison, there's a rule: if you can pay enough and find the right person, you can smuggle whatever you want in there. So I had to do with those who had enough connections to do this, especially the students. We used to try to trick them into getting some books. Like most of them didn't know what poetry was, didn't read anything, basically. So you can trick them into actually letting books in and telling them it was something for your studies. Telling them like, I'm studying literature, it's something for my studies. I actually spent 3 years in maximum security prison in Tora. I got English books and English novels and everything, just pretending it was engineering stuff. And I read like around 300 books and novels, and they were all like engineering. I just said it was engineering stuff, and they allowed it because it's in English. So it has to do, you know, with how you manage to do it. But some people, yeah, I'd admit, at least we had the school stuff and the studying stuff. Some people are not even allowed that. So yeah, our case was better than others, admittedly.
So how did you get the motivation? I mean, I can see that there is time. I think there's nothing as much as time in prison. But how did you get the motivation to continue your studies?
It was really, really hard. But for me, I just thought, I always pictured the day I got released in front of me. And I thought on that day, if I hadn't made use of every single second, I would really regret it. Like those years would be truly lost on the day I got released. I would realize that, like when I was in there, it was not that easy. Like I'm saying it right now. It was really hard to actually believe in this. And I had to keep constantly reminding myself of it. But I always just put this day in front of me, the day I got released, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, whatever, how many years in the future. On that day, when I realized that these years were completely lost, that I did nothing and I have to start over from scratch, that would be the day when actually my years were stolen. Right now, I'm working, I'm doing everything I want, I'm writing, I'm progressing with my life because nothing actually has been stolen except the time itself. But I graduated from college. I'm just like in the same phase in life like most of my peers my age. Maybe I'm even surpassing some of them at work. I have like my own business now. I'm writing so much, I'm publishing. So I think what's making me and what's allowing me to do this now is the fact that I managed to pull through those 6 years and finish my studies and all that. And honestly, my family's support was crucial. Like if I didn't have that kind of support, I don't know what I would have done. Like, and many times I almost gave it up. At the third year, I remember, from engineering, I wanted to postpone and stop studying because second year in engineering is usually the hardest. It has most of the theoretical, conceptual stuff. And I was in power mechanical engineering, Ain Shams. That's like the hardest department in the hardest engineering school. It was really, really such a challenge. And I was completely on my own. I had no one to explain anything to me. They only allowed the papers, the lectures and stuff like that. And I was just completely on my own. It's just me, my brain, and the papers, and no one to explain. I actually wrote a huge article about it. It went a bit viral when I published it. I explained this whole journey about college because it was one of the things that I pride myself most in. It was really hard, and I almost gave up a lot of times. But the moment I graduated, and I think it was priceless. Like it proved something. It proved a lot of things. It's just I've made a lot of points by this. It was a statement for me. Like I could do it. Yeah, he did break me in many sorts of ways, but not in this way. I did not stop resisting in this particular aspect. So that's why after like 2 years or something, college and studying started to become a survival method for me. It was not just like college and studying. It was what my life centered about. It was the purpose. You know what I mean? Imagine like in prison, studying might be something hard for people outside, but that was the best thing in prison. It was the most fun thing to do in prison. There's nothing else to do. It was really hard. I immersed myself on it. I buried myself on my papers, and I felt like I'm doing something. It was tied to this idea of resistance. So it kind of had this higher meaning. It was not just about studying in college and stuff like that. It just had to do with resisting. Every day I wake up, I try to win this battle. I try to study. When I do, I won today. Then I won tomorrow. Then I win the day after and the day after and the day after. This is how I try to perceive it. Every day is a battle. You're resisting. If you don't study, if you give up, they win. If you do, if you like accomplish that, then you win. Even if you don't leave prison, you're winning even inside prison if you continue to resist. This is how I try to perceive it, and this is what college embodied for me. This idea of resistance.
That is really stunning. Stunning will and will to survive, and not just survive, will to accomplish and resist, definitely. For an engineering student, and I think we say that a lot in Egypt, that there are the mathematical minds and there are the more literary minded people. And you seem to have both. So you're an engineer, but your writing is so poetic and nostalgic and philosophical, and you're trying to make sense of the world around you and of yourself. And I found your readings extremely, your writings extremely emotional and realistic at the same time. So it shows the experience and it shows the trauma that you've been through. It's not an easy thing. What made you write? And publish.
Okay.
It's not just writing.
Writing is like a huge thing for me. I used to, by the way, before I got arrested, I used to write those small things. I had this on WordPress. I had a small blog. I used to write only in English. But it wasn't something like no one. I only had a couple of friends read what I wrote. And when I got imprisoned, maybe after I don't know 4 months or something, we were coming back from the first time we went to trial. It was a really hard day. It was the first time I stood inside the metal box, and it was really hard in handcuffs, the lorry. So when I was going back, I was staring at the handcuffs, and I was like looking at my reflection, and a line came to mind of an essay or a piece that starts with this line, like coming back from the trial on the lorry, staring at my reflection on my handcuff. And then I decided to, go with it. And when I went back to the cell, I started
again. Can you say it again?
Yeah, I was like, I was coming back on the lorry, staring at my reflection in the handcuffs.
Right.
That's the line that made me think of, I want to start an essay by that line. So I actually did this. I went back and I started with this line. I started telling the whole story. And eventually wrote like a whole page, and I read it out loud for people in the cell. They started crying, and it got really emotional responses. So I gave it to my sister in the visit, and I told her I was smuggling my writings ever since in the visits. I was just hiding them in my clothes and trying to get them out. And I told her to post it on Facebook on my profile. So the next visit, she smuggled me some responses, handwritten responses from people, and people were actually devastated. Like I was struck by their reactions, and that I actually managed to convey what it was and how it felt for them. And this experience coming back from the lorry, this agonizing feeling of standing in the metal box and all that. And then the reactions made me want to, do more. I just had the feeling like why not document this? If it elicits this kind of reactions from people, if it actually makes our voice heard, why not document it? And obviously back then I thought it would be like a 2-3 time thing until I got released. I never imagined that it would last this long. So the next visit I actually wrote something else, and then the visit after I wrote something else, and I started just writing over and over, and I started getting better at it. I started getting better, and I was fascinated with Arabic and English as languages in general. I used to teach them in prison too. I'll come back to that later. And then I started actually applying my love or passion for that language in writing, and starting. I saw the difference it can make. I saw the potential difference it could make in people's lives. Writing, this idea of writing. I never imagined myself as a writer, by the way. I was always the reader. Then I thought, why not? Like I could write. Why not write? Maybe I could do the same things that people who have been writing all this time did for me. Like, I've been reading books, getting touched by it, being changed, feeling the touch in my life. Then why not do the other thing, be on that other side of the book, write it. And eventually, when I got moved, when we got sentenced, the first exam experience, and then the first time we got, when we were entering a prison, there's this horrible thing where they just beat us up with medals and stuff like that. And I just documented all this, every single thing, and eventually became some sort of survival method for me too. It was a survival thing. I had to write later on. When I was inside something horrible, a traumatic experience, what got me through it is thinking, I will document this. I'm going to write about this. This is going to sound so good in the book I'm planning to write. And then I started doing something. I started perceiving myself. I wrote about this too. Like I was living inside a book. Like, this is my book right now. I had this conviction, maybe 2-3 years in imprisonment, that I'm going to document all this in a book. It was long enough by then to be documented in a book. So I thought I'm going to document it in a book, and now I'm living the book. So I'm actually writing each chapter as I live. And that made me, like, that shift in perspective made me, react differently to so many things. So actually, when you go back to the college thing, part of it was thinking, I wouldn't want the book ending with me, dropping out of college. That would be a very lame book,
Right.
It's not very inspiring. It would be very cool if I managed to pull through to graduate, and that would be a very inspiring book. I would love to read that. So I wanted to have this kind of finish. And eventually I was fooling my mind, if I could say that. I was playing some trick on my mind to make me perceive things as if were chapters of a book. And that made me keep writing, thinking, okay, I'm writing my book right now. I'm documenting everything. This is eventually going to be turned into a book, into something that would make our voices reach people all over the world. People would read it, relate to it. People who aren't there, who don't have a voice, they will have a voice. They'll have someone telling their story, what happened to them in agonizing detail, not just in an overview in the newspaper, but something like the people who lived it. I always like this expression. It was Radwa Ashur. She was talking about how the difference between history and novels, or works of fiction in general, and how history just tells you the events, but novels or works of literature tell you how it was to actually be a person inside that kind of event. And we have all kinds of historical documentation of what's happening by human rights activists and all those people, but there's no actual literature representation of what's happening. And that's what made me become obsessed with writing. I was just watching a class for Walter Mosley, and he was talking about this idea of representation. He said, if you are not represented in history, if you're not represented in literature, you don't exist in history. And it was very, like, it's such a revelation. Yes, if you're not represented in literature, you don't exist. Like, who's going to tell you a story? Especially that no one is actually mentioning our story in history, or deliberately. It's been done deliberately to remove and misrepresent everything that the revolution stands for. Those people who are in prison, they're being portrayed as all of them as terrorists, if at all being portrayed. Some generations are going to come 10 years later, they will have no idea who we were, what we did. It was going to be completely erased from history. So this is the only form of resistance. And this is actually the thing I want to talk about, this idea of arts and resistance, and that importance of them, having to document everything that happened ever since the revolution until today and years to come, in literature, or in even film and theater and painting, all forms of arts. I think this is a huge way and the most crucial way of resistance that we have right now, because 10 years later, generations are going to read what we wrote and know that there were people here, they did this, they did that, they sacrificed this, they went through this, it happened, we were there, and they could not erase us from history. They can rewrite history all they want, but they can't, remove literature. It's going to always be there for us to write, to read. And
very true.
That's what writing is and have become for me. And yeah, like you said, I got published in 2017 when Mada Masr started picking up my writings from Facebook. How it happened is just Facebook posts. It started with Facebook posts. Then people started following. I started developing some small readership and started increasing. My writings started getting shared more. And eventually 2017, Mada Masr, some of them, Dr. Hadaf Swaif linked me with them, and they liked my writings. They decided to publish some of them. Then they started publishing most of what I write. And eventually when I got released, I continued writing for them. And actually now I'm writing for Rosif 22 too. So I am kind of trying to expand on this.
Really, the two best online newspapers existing in Egypt now. This is so inspiring. So tell me about this teaching in prison.
Yeah, teaching. I was really fascinated with the whole idea of doing or making change in other people's lives. Uh, I've actually also written so much about it. It's a huge theory, but it comes down to the fact that human beings are the only creatures who can actually affect change in other people's life and go against the flow. There's this concept in engineering and chemistry. It's called entropy. Entropy, it's a scientific term, but it has to do with the idea that the universal system goes in the direction of disorder and randomness, and no like organ of that system goes against the flow. Like animals, for example, you don't find animals standing up for some beliefs. You don't find lions trying to be vegetarian because it's really cruel to eat. Gazelles. No gazelles trying to do a revolution because they don't want to be eaten anymore. This kind of thing only humans do. They go against the flow. They try to resist to change. And it was really inspiring for me. It has a lot of philosophical aspects too, but like it comes down to this: humans are the only beings capable of change and revolution and all those sorts of things. And I thought teaching was one of the most amazing ways to actually do this kind of change and to try to touch people in that particular way. So I tried, like I told you, I was obsessed with English and Arabic, and the grammar of Arabic. And in prison, there were a lot of people who didn't know English at all. Some of them had like very mediocre knowledge. When they found me, reading English books, talking, there was this Irish guy called Ibrahim Halawa, who was arrested too in Fatah case. So we used to like have some discussions in English. So guys were fascinated by it and came to like asking me to teach them. I was 17 at the time, 17 turning 18. So I was young at it. I never imagined like teaching people. People were 30, 40, 50. They were very old. They had kids my age sometimes. And some of them learned about my obsession with Nahu and Arabic and stuff like that. Yeah, exactly, grammar. So they came to me also asking me like for some tips and stuff, and eventually turned into some sort of classroom. I was sitting with a group of 4 here, teaching them those English, those Arabic, and I actually enjoyed it very much more than I actually like imagined I would. I sent for some books. I started, structuring some sort of syllabus, starting giving them exams. I started giving the grades to the sons in the visit when you don't like perform well, and telling them, your father's got a 0 like in the last exam. Then later on started developing, and when you teach class after class, you start personally getting better. Like I found this out. I got better at Arabic and grammar and English by teaching them much more than I had by studying them. It was very fascinating, and I actually started to know how people understood things, which particular parts they usually ask questions. I knew how to predict which parts they wouldn't really understand clearly, which parts I would need to stress. I expect the questions before they come. It was increasingly getting better. And when I got moved to Wadi Natron after I got sentenced, you know how like rumors spread in prison, and they eventually heard that there's someone who teaches English, stuff like that. I started doing the same thing in my cell. And then I had just finished the first year in engineering, and there were a lot of ثانوية students, the high school certificate, in prison. They just were transferred from juvie, and they were entering the exams. So they made this sort of announcement, like if anyone wants to help, explain stuff for them. They were all clueless. So I was fresh, out of high school, just first year of college. I already had and I was in engineering, so I know about chemistry, physics, math, and algebra, calculus, that kind of stuff. So I volunteered, and I was actually, I taught like 3 of them, all those subjects: English, Arabic, calculus, chemistry, physics. And it was really, really an amazing experience. It was a different experience. They were young. I used to chase them around in the recess and play around, and tell them to do their homework and stuff like that. And it was really fascinating. Eventually, one of them now was a geography teacher, and I'm the one who managed to make him go through. He came back. He went to literature and arts college in Ain Shams, and he eventually graduated and became a teacher. And it's amazing to know that you were an integral reason. If it weren't for you, he wouldn't have had this career. But he might have been somewhere else completely. If he had a met at a particular time and place in prison where no one else was explaining things for him. So that's why I got fascinated by teaching in prison. And I went through with this. So right now, my business has to do with teaching. Like I created a small business called the English Coach for the English courses and stuff. And I completely left engineering, by the way. I just decided to completely focus on the whole teaching thing. I started teaching like crazy, and I started hiring more people, started managing. I got more like quality control teams and started expanding. It's really nice now. And I'm really enjoying the idea that I managed to turn teaching into a career and to be able to, help people in that way. English particularly, is very crucial now for anyone. And there are a lot of people in Egypt struggling. They can't just advance their careers in the future. They can't travel, postgraduate studies, all that kind of things because of English, TOEFL preparation, IELTS preparation. So it makes a huge difference in people's lives, especially Egyptians, to be able to help them like advance their English and move on to the next level in their lives.
So do you do that online?
Yes, I was planning it from the very start to be online, and then the Corona pandemic came, and actually the online market suddenly expanded. So, you know, it just worked in my favor. So yeah, it just started expanding. Most people turned to online courses. So yeah, most of them started coming to me. I started developing a system, and it was, yeah, well, like the quality was good. People were happy. They started word of mouth marketing. Some people came, so I made a kind of process. And it just—
What is the site?
called the English Coach.
The English Coach. Okay.
EnglishCoachOnline.com. There's a Facebook page. It's basically.
Yeah. When you were released, it was the beginning of the pandemic.
Yes, that was very ironic.
So you were imprisoned once again.
Exactly. I actually wrote an
kind
article.
of imprisonment.
It's a much better one, obviously. Like,
Yes.
I actually wrote an article about it in Mada. How a
I
different
read
country.
that. Yes, I read that. It was fascinating, actually. Okay, so back to prison, and I hate to take you back there, but you sound so optimistic and so motivated and almost happy. How did that? Okay, let me rephrase this. What were the hardest times in prison?
Prison, like it was all of it was a very horrible and dark experience. And I'm happy now, like I told you. Maybe relatively speaking, not happy, but I'm surviving. I'm progressing. I'm going on with my life because of what I told you. Like I had in mind when I was in there, but I'm not trying to romanticize prison into something that it's not. It's not a lovely place full of hopes and achievements where people change for the better. It's not like this. Some people were destroyed in prison. Some people, personal friends of mine, went completely mad. Like in the medical sense, they just lost it completely. And they went out of prison completely mad. They lost their minds. Some people died in prison in front of us. Like a lot of people know, like Shadi Habash and many other people whose names are not known. We saw this by our own eyes. So prison is not a romantic place. It's not a good place, and it was very, very hard and dark. And I wrote many things. Like if you read my stuff that I write about prison, they're actually very dark. And
They are. Yes, I did read. I did read. They are very dark.
People actually cry so much when they read them. So yeah, I wasn't happy when I'm representing prison or depicting prison in my writing. So hardest times, really, there's a lot of stuff to pick from. I would say one of the hardest times were the parts with my father. Like I told you, it was so hard, so guilty seeing him around. It was like, I don't know. I just can't explain the suffering, the psychological toll it takes on you. Seeing him all the time like this in prison, and he was not doing the same as me. He wasn't trying to read and get the best out of it. He was completely depressed. My father was a man that was obsessed with work and business, and he was that kind of person who always like knew nothing but work and business. It was devastating for him to be torn away from his work like this and to feel like he's not doing anything. He's completely helpless. He was just not built that way. He was built like that kind of person who always knows what to do. He's always providing, solving problems and stuff like that. So it was devastating. He used to sleep for days on end, only like walk outside, take like a stroll, go back to the cell and sleep. And I had to witness this for 3.5 years with absolutely nothing to do. And I couldn't pull him out of it. I could not motivate him the same way I was trying to motivate myself. He didn't really care much about, and I don't know, putting that change in the world, motivating, writing the book, all those stuff didn't really concern him.
That's youth.
He was 50 years old. I was 20. I was 17, and in that particular part when I started doing all those things, I was 20. I'm just at the start of my life. He's 50, and at that age, not many people, think of this kind of starting over, doing something new, and trying to make the best of it. I was looking up for my future. For him, he was like he from his perspective, it was nearly at the end or the late stage of my life, I'm going through this now. Like after all this life, and now I go to prison. He was perceiving it like this. He had no like political motivations or affiliations to make him think this is some sort of resistance. He didn't perceive it as such. He didn't really have any motivation for being in prison. He was 100% wasting his life, wasting the years of his life for no reason. He did not care about being here. He didn't want to resist those people. He didn't want to do anything. You know what I mean? So it was really hard knowing I was the reason. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I was the reason. Like I caused this. Yeah, it's a terrible thing overall in general. But I was like the direct reason that happened, and I had to live with it. So that I would say these were the hardest moments throughout prison.
It's the regime that's the reason. It's not you. So
it was hard to think of it that way when I was in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You had somehow to feel guilty about it. So yeah, I think these were the hardest moments. If I were to pick a single day, it might be the day that the appeal got refused, because it was so final. You always, had this kind of hope. Maybe we'll get out released in the next time, we stand before a prosecutor, and maybe in the next sentence, maybe in the appeal. But then when the appeal got refused, there was nothing else to look forward to. That's it. And it was 15 years. Like it wasn't like tomorrow or the year next, the following year. It was 15 years ahead. So that day was very dark. I had some irreparable damage happen to me in that day, and the days to come, until the whole presidential pardon thing started coming. Then we started having hope again, and then people started going and me not going. That was like the third hardest phase, when I realized that I'm not leaving in the pardon too. And then that same hope got torn away again. I actually wrote many things about this kind of hope and how, you got to be very wary of hope. It's very dangerous and deadly. It was deadly in prison. I reached that point where hope was like was an enemy. You got to be aware of hope, because it has this, the habit or the knack of sneaking into your heart. Every time you're trying to not hope or to not be attached to any kind of thing or expectations, and you just, unconsciously have hope sneak in your heart, and you start getting attached to something.
Hope. It's human to hope.
It was really hard. That was the hardest bit. The parts where you made the mistake of hoping, only to have it torn away again. Every time it left some sort of irreparable damage, to be honest.
So you said you were focusing more on the English coach, and you were not really into working in engineering, right?
Yes.
So is that your future plan? Is that part of your future plan?
Yeah, I honestly think engineering was amazing. I'm an analytical person, and engineering was amazing to study. It was an amazing field of study for me. And I think I owe a lot of my current management skills to engineering, and not anything I read about management or marketing, any of that sort. I owe it to engineering. It just taught me so much about problem solving, about different approaches to problems, about analyzing everything, putting everything into perspective, dealing with life. I always tell people that engineering is not a career, it's more of a lifestyle or a mentality. So you are an engineer, and that's it. You're never not an engineer. I will always be an engineer, even if I don't work as an engineer, because I perceive life as an engineer. I take my decisions as an engineer. Even when I write, I approach my writing that way. I always have like a clear outline of ideas and how I link them together, what I want to achieve from them and everything. And then I start applying the poetic sense you were talking about. But in structure, it's engineered. I engineer my writing in that way. It's like how my mind operates. So I think I took away from engineering what I want. Like, this is what I want from engineering. And anything further on, I tried to go for like an internship in a consultancy office. And I saw people there and I looked at them. And from the first day, I just realized this is not who I want to be in 10 years. And the next day I quit. I only spent 1 year in the internship and I just quit. Said I'm never going back again. And switched to this whole teaching thing and writing. This is my future and how I see it. Teaching and writing. Trying to grow my business and writing on the side. I'm planning to write books in the future. I told you before, I'm trying to apply for an MFA in the US, and a creative writing MFA. This is like the huge dream now for me, the main goal. So I'm aiming for it. I'm applying for a couple of schools. If I get this is going to be a great step on my way to write a book, document my experience, try to get published. So yeah, I'm planning to take this career path as a writer, and as the teacher and instructor, expand my business as much as I can. This is basically how I perceive my future. I think these are directly located to my vision of trying to change. Engineering is not very much, to be honest.
What do you think the future of Egypt will be like? do you think that hope will prevail, the activism, the revolution concepts, bread, freedom, justice, all these beautiful concepts that came out of the revolution? Do you think the way it's going now, do you think this will be accomplished at some point?
I can say, to be honest, I hope so, but I don't think so. I really hope so. Like, you never know. Like, this is one rule you learn. You never know. Like, you never know what might happen. Hopefully, I hope so, but I don't think so. And honestly, I started to really have this only sole dream of playing any kind of role just to help get political prisoners released in Egypt. That's like my only point of focus. And they unfortunately succeeded in making all of us think that way. All of us, we all just want those people they're rotting behind bars, and our friends, the people we know and the people we don't know, they're all rotting behind bars. And most of us have no interest in anything else beside their release, because it's the most immediate and hurtful, thing that's going on right now. And some of my really close friends are still in there. One of my really, really close friends, Ayman Musa, he's in the case with me. And I was released and he was not. He was my best friend. I even wrote many articles about him personally and a poem about him. He was a really close friend to me. And for me, I would say I just want them to be released. Ayman Musa, Sanat Saif, Sayyid, and all those people in Mukka. The names are endless. The list is endless. And to be honest, after they're released, if they all get released, I don't know if I have any interest anymore in changing anything in Egypt. I would say that was kind of killed in prison. And I got more interested in the whole concept of change worldwide. I just started viewing change as more of a universal thing. I can do my best to change the situation for those under injustice in Egypt, but why not do this everywhere? You know what I mean? Why not try to do this everywhere in every country? Help whomever can be helped. Talk about political prisoners all over the world. Adopt this kind of more global approach to change, because the way it's going, how I perceive it, I just can't see any logical way for Egypt to leave this kind of dark tunnel. I don't know how. Any way that could be that has a more positive scenario. Like, all scenarios are into a more darker, more negative ones. I really don't know any other way. I can't imagine or picture any other way to make it better. That's depressing, yeah, but I don't know.
Abdelrahman ElGendy, former political prisoner, engineer, philosopher, poet. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.